tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. It's almost midday. We want to hear from you. I know that our incoming presenters are going to want to hear from you, Gloria and Christopher Hope. Let's go live to them. There they are.
Prime Minister's Questions live. Now, morning to you two. Big day today.
Morning.
A huge day for Rishi Sunak, of course, because we're debating Rwanda Bill Day 2. 60 Tory MPs rebelled yesterday. The big vote, you guys, is later, third reading. If they vote that down, he's in big trouble.
He is. But is that what our viewers and listeners want to talk about today? Because don't forget, you know this runs through everything we do on GB News. We want to hear from what our viewers and listeners would ask the Prime Minister. We're going to put those questions to our top panel of politicians, because I'm sure they will want to talk about Rwanda and immigration, but I'm sure there are other things they're going to want to talk about too.
I'm sure they're going to want to talk about the post office.
We will see.
They should do after the evidence yesterday in the House of Commons. Of course, we heard, didn't we, from Fujitsu, Andrew and Bev. They're willing to put their hands in their pockets. Finally, morally, they feel they should be coughing up for the bugs that caused the misery. These hundreds of sub-postmasters. Is that what would you both ask? Bev, you normally got a crack. And what's your question for the
PM? Do you know what? I'm really incensed by this Catherine Birbalsingh being in court this week, Britain's strictest head. I think she's an absolute role model, and I would want to ask Rishi Sunak, do you want to display your support for Catherine Birbalsingh? She's just issued a statement, actually, on Twitter to say that she has increased the number of Muslim pupils in her school by 50%. She offers a fantastic education. Her own grandmother was Muslim. Will he show his public support to her that she does not have to provide a separate prayer space for these children?
That's a great question. And Andrew, what's yours? On the post office?
Well, on the post office, I want to know when the government... We've got this public inquiry ongoing, Chris, but I want to know when the Prime Minister is going to require Fujitsu to write a very, very large cheque immediately to those postmasters and postmistresses, which isn't going to be gobbled up in legal fees, because we know when we had the court ruling in 2019, Chris and Gloria, it was £58 million compensation. They only got 11 million because the rest was just devoured by avaricious lawyers. Shameful.
Well, thank you, Andrew and Bev, and it's fast approaching midday.
This is GB News, Britain's election channel. PMQs Live starts right now. It is almost midday on Wednesday, the 17th of January. This is PMQs Live on GB News with me, Gloria DiPiero, and Christopher Hope.
In just one moment, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer go head-to-head at Prime Minister's questions. We'll have full coverage of every moment, every spit and cough, and we'll be getting reaction from Health Minister Maria Caulfield and Shadow Culture Minister Stephanie Peacock.
What are you hoping, very briefly, that your leader's going to benefit from today? What's the argument he's going to prosecute?
So I think he's going to focus probably on the Rwanda plan and why it's so important that we get that done.
And is that difficult for you, Stephanie Peacock from Labour?
Not at all, because the government in complete chaos, so I'm sure Rwanda will feature from across the House.
It's a big moment. I mean, and concern, of course, for Mr Sunak. He could lose the vote tonight, Maria.
Well, let's wait and see.
And Labour's, what would be Labour saying today? They were saying this deal is not going to work, this Rwanda plan won't work.
It's completely unworkable. They've wasted £400 million of taxpayers' money and they're in complete chaos with resignations. He can't unite his own party.
We'll be crossing to PMQs Live as soon as he's on his feet. Please email your questions. What would you ask the Prime Minister today? It is your PMQs.
That's right. We found your questions are far better than anyone's we can dream up in the studio. And indeed, MPs are asking. Notably, last week's big question was whether there should be a knighthood from Mr Alan Bates from the Post Office. And that went viral, that question, the answer there from Esther McVeigh. So any question, your best question, ping it to us and we'll ask our panel too.
Let us cross live to the Prime Minister's questions. The Speaker is on his feet, about to start Prime Minister's question. This is sort of the bare-knuckle fighting of Westminster. This is when you really get to see their metal, what they are made of.
What's it like now in the chamber, Maria, when you're waiting for the PM to speak? Is it a moment of tension? What's it feel like?
It's very noisy. It's quite hard to follow what's going on.
Prime Minister's questions.
Here we go.
Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. According to the Alzheimer's Society, nearly 5,000 people are currently living with dementia in my Colne Valley constituency, of whom 3,153 have had a formal diagnosis. That figure went up by 1 this week with my dad's diagnosis. My dad is my constituent. Will my right honourable friend pledge to make dementia a priority by driving up diagnosis rates, bolstering dementia research, investing in social care and improving access to the most innovative diagnostic methods and improving access to new life-changing treatments?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I send my warmest wishes to my honourable friend and his father and family, and I recognise that a dementia diagnosis can bring worry, both for the person who is diagnosed, but also their wider family. And my honourable friend is absolutely right about the timely diagnosis of dementia. It's vital to make sure that those affected can access the care and support they need. NHS England is actually carrying out a pilot to make sure that we can improve dementia diagnosis in care homes. Our major condition strategy also includes a focus on dementia, but crucially, as my honourable friend said, we are now doubling the funding for dementia research so we can help everyone, including his father.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Can I send my best wishes to the honourable member and his father also, and all those suffering in this way? Mr Speaker, I can't let today pass without saying how saddened I was by the tragic death of Bronson Battersby, aged just 2, who died in heartbreaking circumstances in Skegness. I know that this House will join me in sending our deepest sympathies to his family. Mr Speaker, the government has been forced to admit that it has lost contact with 85% of the 5,000 people earmarked for removal to Rwanda. Has he found them yet?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what I can tell the honourable gentleman is that in spite of him blocking every single attempt that we have taken, we have managed now, because of our actions, to reduce the number of people coming here by over a third last year, remove over 20,000 people from this country back to their home countries, carried out 70% more illegal enforcement raids, arrested hundreds of people, closed down thousands of bank accounts, and processed over 100,000 cases, the biggest number in over 20 years, Mr. Speaker. That's because on this side of the House, we want to stop the boats, we have a plan, it's working, and with him, we would just go back to square one.
My first thought is, how do you actually lose 4,250 people? Then you remember that this is the government that scrapped HS2, but the costs are still rising by billions. This is the government that spent £400 million of taxpayers' money on a Rwanda scheme, yet can't deport a single person. And this is the government that waged a week-long war on the Greek Prime Minister for reasons known only to themselves. And suddenly you're reminded that, of course, this farce of a government could lose the people it was planning to remove. But he didn't answer the question, so I'll ask him again. Where are the 4,250 people that the government has lost? Where are they?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we've actually identified and removed over 20,000 people from this country back to where they belong. But he asks these questions about the Rwanda scheme, Mr. Speaker. Now, it is important that we get this up and running because it's important, as the National Crime Agency say, that we have a working deterrence to resolve this issue. That's indeed how Australia solved this problem, and that's how Albania has worked for us. But we know he asked these questions, Mr. Speaker, about the detail of these things, but we all know he doesn't actually care about solving this problem, and we know this because when the BBC asked him about the Rwanda plan, they quizzed him and they said, if the numbers crossing the channel on small boats decline, i.e. so it's working, would you still reverse it? The Labour leader said yes. It's crystal clear he doesn't have a plan and it will be back to square one,
Mr. Speaker, spending £400 million on a plan not to get anybody to Rwanda whilst losing 4,000 people is not a plan. It's a farce. Only this government could waste hundreds of millions of pounds on a removals policy that doesn't remove anyone. Only this government could claim that it's going to get flights off the ground only to discover they couldn't find a plane. Only this government could sign a removal deal with Rwanda, only to end up taking people from Rwanda to here. But he still hasn't answered the question. So I'll try again. What progress has he made in locating the 4,250 people his government has apparently lost? He's dodged it 3 times. Where are they?
Mr. Speaker, it's the same thing again and again. Here we are talking about what we are doing, but I'm happy to go over it, Mr. Speaker. What are we doing? We've increased the number of illegal enforcement raids by 70%, leading to thousands of arrests, using powers, Mr. Speaker, that he blocked in this House. We have closed down thousands of bank accounts of illegal workers, again, using powers that he blocked, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Mr. Do you want that early cup of tea, or are you going to be a little bit more silent, Prime Minister?
And, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have worked through a record number of cases and returned a record number of people back to where they've come. All of that is a plan that is working, and we can see that it's working because the numbers of people coming to this country are down by over a third, Mr. Speaker. But again, it is a bit rich to hear him in here pretending that he cares about how we actually stop the boats when he's been crystal clear. He's been crystal clear and said that even if the plan is working to reduce the numbers, he would still scrap it, Mr. Speaker. It's because he has no values, no conviction and no plan. It is back to square one.
No. Yes,
he hasn't got a clue where they are, has he? I can tell you one place they aren't, and that's Rwanda. Because The only people who sent to Rwanda is cabinet ministers. And for all the word, the ridiculous thing is, we know the Prime Minister himself doesn't even believe in this Rwanda gimmick. He had to be talked out of scrapping the whole thing. He didn't want to fund it. He didn't think it would work. When he sees his party tearing itself apart, hundreds of bald men scrapping over a single broken comb, doesn't he wish he'd had the courage to stick to his guns?
Well, Mr. Speaker, now, I have absolute conviction that the plan we've put in place will work. Absolute conviction, because I believe it's important that we grip this problem. Now, he spends a lot of his time in this House talking about his time as a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, and I would urge him to listen to them, because Lord Wolfson has said that our bill severely limits the... 4 eminent KCs have said that it is undoubtedly the most robust piece of immigration legislation this Parliament has seen, and Mr. Speaker, a former Supreme Court...
I want to hear what the Prime Minister's got to say, because it matters to my constituents, those who feel it doesn't matter to those. Please leave, Prime Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, 4 eminent KCs said this is undoubtedly the most robust legislation passed, and a former Supreme Court Justice has been clear that the bill would work. But I know, Mr. Speaker, he's always been more interested in what lefty lawyers have to say, Mr. Speaker. I've even got here the textbook that he authored for them. And it's called, and I quote, European Human Rights Law by Keir Starmer. So...
Prime Minister! Prime Minister, when I stand up, please sit down. Can I just say, we don't use props in this House, and I will certainly ensure that if you do need reminding, I certainly will. Keir Starmer.
It's such utterly pathetic nonsense. He's been brutally exposed by his own MPs yet again. He's got one party chair who says she hopes the Lords will rip his Rwanda deal to pieces. He's got 2 more who had to quit because they don't think it'll work. All of them appointed by him, all now in open revolt against his policy, each other, and reality. Is there any wonder they all think this gimmick is doomed to failure when the Prime Minister himself doesn't believe in it?
Mr. Speaker, it is rich to hear from the honourable gentleman about belief in something, because it will be news to him. It is actually the case that you can believe in something and stick to that position on this side of the House.
I will say to this side. Oh, hello. Somebody's jumping in from over. Can I just say it's very important. It's an important day. People want to know what's going on. So I want my constituents, just like yours, to hear what the Prime Minister's got to say. Prime Minister.
Just this week, Mr. Speaker, we had another example of the honourable gentleman doing one thing, saying another, because this week he backed the Home Secretary in banning the terrorist group Hizb ut-Tahrir, despite him personally using the European Court of Human Rights to try and stop them being banned. And don't take my word for it, Mr. Speaker, the extremist's own press release said, and I quote, the Hizb ut-Tahrir legal team led by Keir Starmer. Now, I know he doesn't like talking about them because they've been a client, but when I see a group chanting jihad on our streets, I ban them, he invoices them.
Because there's 8 questions that I think some of you may want. Well, I'll tell you what, there's some's already gone off the list who wanted them. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, if he stuck to his position, he'd be voting with us. He'd be voting with us. His former Home Secretary says the plan won't work. His current Home Secretary calls it batshit. His former Immigration Minister doesn't back his plan. Even the Prime Minister himself doesn't believe in it. And last week, another of his MPs said the Tories should admit that things have got worse since they came to office, that after 14 years they've left Britain less united, the country is a sadder place. If the Prime Minister can't even persuade his own MPs that it's worth supporting him, if he himself doesn't even believe in his own policies, why on earth should anyone else think differently?
Mr. Speaker, another week when it's crystal clear the honourable gentleman doesn't believe in anything and he doesn't have a plan. Now, while he talks the country down, let me update him on what's actually been happening in the past week. Inflation more than halved from 11% to 4%. Real wages rising. Real wages rising for the 5th month in a row. Last week, rates started falling and millions of people benefited from a tax cut worth £450. So while he takes us back to square one with a £28 billion tax grab, let's stick with a plan that's delivering a brighter future for Britain.
Mr. Speaker, it's against the law to silence victims of crime, but that's exactly what the Post Office did through the use of non-disclosure agreements. And this is just the most recent case of NDAs covering up mismanagement, misconduct and even crimes at work. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, consider banning their use in all severance agreements once and for all?
Minister. My right honourable friend is right to raise an important point, and the ability to speak out about things is key to unlocking justice. And while NDAs can have a place, my honourable friend is right to say that they shouldn't be used to stop victims of crime, in particular, getting the justice that they deserve. I can tell her that the Ministry of Justice are carefully considering how to best address this issue, including legislation, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, will keep the House updated on further progress.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, when people woke up today in homes that they can't afford to heat, with mortgages that they're struggling to pay, to news that inflation is once again on the rise, they'll have looked to Westminster for answers. And instead they find a UK government which is tearing itself apart over how quickly it can send vulnerable people on a plane to Rwanda. Surely the Prime Minister must understand that the anger that some of his own backbenchers have towards him is no comparison to the anger that the public have towards his party.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, if the honourable gentleman did care about supporting working families to pay their bills, to pay their mortgage, why on earth is the SNP making Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, where the average, Mr. Speaker, not the wealthiest, where the average worker in Scotland is now paying more tax than they do in England?
Stephen Flynn.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the Rwanda bill, the reality is that if you want to stop the smuggling gangs, you should introduce safe and legal routes. But instead, the Prime Minister is seeking to weaponise some of the most vulnerable people in society. It is straight out of the cruel and callous right-wing extremist playgroup. His time in office is fast approaching its conclusion. Does he seriously want this to be his legacy?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, it is important that we stop the boats because illegal migration is simply not fair, Mr. Speaker. It's not right that some people jump the queue, that they take away our resources to help those who are the most compassionate, that need our most help, and, by the way, Mr. Speaker, are exploited by gangs, and many of them lose their lives making these dangerous crossings. So I completely disagree with the honourable gentleman. The fair and the compassionate thing to do is to break these criminal gangs, and that's why we're going to stop the boats.
Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unexpectedly, 5 months ago, I had a heart attack. And thanks to the swift action of the NHS emergency services, it was caught early. So one stent operation later, I was on a swift path to rehabilitation and recovery and stand here today fighting fit and a bit lighter too. So along with encouraging everyone to visit the British Heart Foundation website to understand the early warning signs and get fantastic resources to help them, would the Prime Minister also join me in personally thanking everyone who helped to save my life and help me recover, including the East of England Ambulance Service, the teams at Watford General and Harefield Hospital, the cardiac rehabilitation teams, and everyone who supported me, especially my family and my team, some of whom are in the gallery today, who helped ensure that I continue to deliver for the great people of Watford.
I thank my honourable friend for sharing his story, and I know the whole House will be delighted to hear that he's made a swift recovery. We all wish him good health for the future as he resumes his excellent campaigning on behalf of his constituents in Watford. And I also join him in thanking our fantastic NHS staff for the life-saving work that they do up and down the country. We're backing them with record resources, from our doctors to our ambulance service. We are all in this House truly grateful for what they do.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Until the UK government calls for an immediate ceasefire, it is complicit in the horrors in Gaza. Not my words, but those of the head of Oxfam, who, like every single agency trying to operate on the ground, is clear that aid can't be effectively delivered while fighting continues. More UK aid is, of course, welcome, but even when it does get through, it can result in what one Palestinian aid worker calls bombing us on full stomachs. 24,000 people have already been killed. So can he tell us what will it take for him to back a permanent bilateral ceasefire?
Mr. Speaker, of course, we want to see a peaceful resolution to this conflict as soon as possible. A sustainable, permanent ceasefire with an end to the destruction, fighting and loss of life, release of hostages and no resumption of hostilities would, of course, be the best way forward. But in order to achieve that, a number of things need to happen. Hamas would have to agree to release all the hostages. Hamas would no longer have to be in charge of Gaza, and the threat of more rocket attacks from Hamas into Israel would have to end. And the Palestinian Authority, boosted with assistance, would need to return to Gaza in order to provide governance and aid. That is the sustainable ceasefire that we will work very hard to bring about.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I was unsure whether to raise a national issue, such as the desperate need for a Minister for Men, or a local issue, such as Doncaster's need for a new hospital or Edlington for a new leisure centre. But I thought the best thing I could do is ask the Prime Minister to come and have a tour of Doncaster. And while I'm showing him around my hometown, I can press the need for a Minister for Men, I can show him the site for a new hospital, and I can introduce him to the people of Edlington so he can discuss their new leisure centre. So will the Prime Minister accept my invitation?
Well, thanks to my honourable friend's fantastic campaigning on behalf of his constituents. Doncaster City Council has received, I think, more than £80 million in levelling up funding to support its regeneration products. And most recently, Doncaster has been awarded £20 million in our long-term plan for towns over the next 10 years, which I know he is working very hard to make sure is prioritised for local people. I would be delighted to discuss those projects and his other ideas when I come and visit him as soon as my diary allows.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 71% of requests for funding from the Community Ownership Fund aimed at saving libraries, pubs and village halls have been rejected since 2021. It pits communities against each other and does nothing to address the underlying causes that have led to the loss of these much-loved assets. When will the government offer more than a simple sticking plaster for our towns, high streets and communities?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I set up the Community Ownership Fund when I was Chancellor, and it is doing fantastic work, funding hundreds of projects across the country, including, I believe, one in the Honourable Lady's own constituency, the Back on the Map scheme. It is there to support local communities to take over assets, whether it's pubs, village halls or other community assets, and it's doing a fantastic job. It's right that there's a competitive process because we want to make sure that that money is deployed in the areas where it can make the most difference.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Overcrowding on Chiltern railways has become a daily misery for commuters from stations like Hadnam and Tame Parkway and Princes Risborough in my constituency, the root cause of which is an ageing fleet constantly breaking down and shorter trains having to be run. There are proposals on the table for both short-term additional capacity and long-term fleet renewals. So will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, instruct the Department for Transport to fast-track those proposals so we can end overcrowding on Chiltern?
Prime Minister.
And I agree with my honourable friend that the performance on Chiltern hasn't been good enough in recent times. I know that Chiltern have recently begun engagement with the rolling stock leasing market, which will help reduce overcrowding, but also together with DfT, they're looking at providing additional capacity at peak times. So I know my honourable friend, the Rail Minister, will ensure that these plans continue to progress and keep my honourable friend updated.
Patrick Ready.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What exactly is it about the prospect of deportation to Rwanda that makes the government think it will be such a deterrent to asylum seekers? Does it think that life in Rwanda is somehow less comfortable, less secure, less safe than it is here in the United Kingdom? What does the government think is wrong with Rwanda that means asylum seekers won't want to live there?
Speaker, it's not that there's anything wrong with it, it's just that it's not the United Kingdom, Mr. Speaker. And I have to point out to the honourable gentleman, deterrence works. We know that it works because our scheme with Albania has ensured a 90% reduction in arrivals from that country.
To Therese Coffey.
Mr. Speaker, I know my right honourable friend the Prime Minister is committed to energy security and the development of renewables, as am I, and that's why Sizewell C started a DCO this week. However, there are plenty of other developments which are happening on greenfield sites where CPOs are planned to be used by National Grid to plough up farming fields used for food but also tree production as well, when there are brownfield sites already available connected to the network. National Grid is refusing to publish its study of Bradwell and why they deem it would not be suitable for this connection of offshore wind farms and interconnectors. Will he meet with me to discuss this and other East Anglian MPs and also to use the powers of his office to get that study published?
As my honourable friend will know, that planning applications for new infrastructure are managed independently, so I can't comment on specific cases, but I do agree with her that it's important to listen to the views of local communities like those that she represents across Suffolk and East Anglia. I know my honourable friend for Aberdeenshire West was visiting her area recently to mark the commencement of the project at Sizewell C, and I can assure her that relevant ministers will continue to pay close attention to her concerns.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House last week correctly described the contaminated blood scandal as on another level compared to other scandals. Now that Sir Brian Langstaff has announced today the publication of the final report of the infected blood inquiry, he reminds us, Mr. Speaker, that his principal recommendation remains that a compensation scheme should be set up with urgency and that no one should be in any doubt about the serious nature of the failings over more than 6 decades that led to catastrophic loss of life and compounded suffering. Prime Minister, over 100 parliamentarians wrote to you this week, so can you tell us now when those affected will be paid compensation for their loss?
Mr. Speaker, I'm acutely aware of the strength of feeling on this issue and indeed the suffering of all of those impacted by this dreadful scandal. I gave evidence to the inquiry last year, and as I said then, I recognise the suffering that thousands have experienced over decades. He will know that the Minister for the Cabinet Office updated Parliament on this towards the end of last year. He'll know it's a highly complex issue. Interim payments have been made in some cases, and we are committed, absolutely committed, to responding to the final report as quickly as possible following its publication.
Robert Neal.
Mr. Speaker, last week, Conservative-controlled Bromley Council's children's services were rated outstanding by Ofsted in all 4 areas of inspection. Only the 3rd time that has happened under the current framework. Will he join me in congratulating the officers and members of Bromley Council and perhaps even visit Bromley and see our new cost-saving civic centre?
Well, perhaps not quite on my way to Doncaster, but I'll bear it in mind. But can I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to Bromley Council and all the officers involved in providing what is an incredibly important service in their local community and looking after some of the most vulnerable children in our society. They all deserve our thanks and our praise for their brilliant efforts.
Dr. Rupert Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HS2 promised to transform intercity travel and my seat where Old Oak Common will be one day. But after Leeds and Manchester were ditched, its London end's now in doubt. Could the PM today commit to ensuring it at least reaches Euston, or is he intent on stopping all transport forms, except private jets, maybe?
Prime Minister.
I think her leader might have something to say about the forms of transportation, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps on HS2 as well, because I still haven't actually heard from him his position on the whole subject. But we have, Mr. Speaker, I would say Old Oak Common is destined to be one of the foremost stations in the country because of the station and the extra connectivity that it will have across London as the initial terminus for HS2 trains. And as we said at the announcement, we are working with the private sector, as we have done in other developments in London, to raise private money, save the taxpayer money, and deliver the connection to Euston as planned.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just got back from the inaugural Women's Health Summit. During the summit, it was announced that the specialist maternal mental health services will now be available to women in every part of England by March. This is particularly pertinent for me after one of my constituents, Jessica Cronshaw, passed away whilst pregnant with her baby Elsie after suffering with severe pregnancy sickness, hyperemesis gravidarum. So can I thank the government for following through with this important reform and push him to keep going with the spirit of this reform so our NHS is fit for women in the future?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this matter, and I know the whole House will want to convey our sympathies to Jessica's family, but I'm pleased that the reforms that we are making will make a difference to women across the country in the future. We're committed to our women's health strategy, and I'm grateful that for her support and, again, her advice and ideas so we can ensure it delivers the care that we want it to across the country.
Andrew Gwynn.
The Conservative candidate for the Wellingborough by-election yesterday revealed that the Conservative Party had offered her a deal to be the candidate if the previous member, her partner, stood down without a fuss. The Prime Minister said just last week that candidate selection is all done locally within his party. So would he now like to deny that this secret deal was offered?
Mr. Speaker, as I said last week, in our party, candidate selection is done locally.
James Gray.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend the Prime Minister agree with me that a remote rural hotel is just the wrong place to house asylum seekers and refugees from their point of view? And will you therefore join me in thanking the Home Secretary for announcing yesterday that the Wiltshire Hotel outside Rolwyn Bassett is in fact to be returned to its proper purpose in April?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question. He's absolutely right. The use of hotels is unfair, and also it's unfair on local communities and also costs taxpayers £8 million a day. And that's why our plans to reduce the number of people coming has meant that we could close the first 50 hotels across the country, with more to follow. And I thank the Home Secretary and his team for their efforts. But fundamentally, the only way to resolve this once and for all is to implement our Rwanda scheme so we can have a working deterrent, and that's how we will stop the boats.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by desperate constituents who have rung every single pharmacy within a 50-mile radius of Warrington and still haven't been able to access their medication for ADHD. This has been going on for months and isn't just a Warrington issue. Pharmacists are calling it the worst shortage ever seen, with only 11% of people able to access their full dose this month. And ADHD UK have called the government's response pathetic. They're right, aren't they?
Yeah. So I'm very sorry to hear about the situation in the Honourable Lady's constituency, but the Health Secretary obviously heard what she said and is in touch with the relevant drug bodies to make sure we can have the provision of ADHD medicine to all of those who need it.
Tom Hunt.
For around a decade, over 200 of my constituents in the Mill complex in Ipswich have been caught in the cruelest form of limbo. There's deep structural problems with the building and cladding problems. A few years ago, they got about £50 million out of court settlement to make a contribution towards a cladding cost. The freeholder, NAMA, the Irish financial entity set up after the Irish banking crisis, ran away with that money, putting my residents and my constituents back in square one with little to no hope. Will the Prime Minister talk to the Irish tea shop to raise this immoral case and also meet with me to discuss a way forward for my constituents, who I meet with every week?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about my honourable friend's case, but I'll ensure that the government looks into the details and gets back to him in shortest order about how we can support him and his constituents.
Martin Doherty's close question.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have repeatedly expressed my commitment to joint working with the First Minister of Scotland to deliver for the people across the country.
Martin Doherty-Hughes.
I'm grateful for that answer, Mr. Speaker. While there's rightfully been much attention paid to the Post Office Horizon scandal, there is another shocking example of government and private sector collusion that began under the last Labour administration and continued under the Tories. Mr. Speaker, almost 200,000 mortgage prisoners who borrowed with high street lenders such as Northern Rock have become trapped after the portfolio was sold off to foreign entities like Topaz Finance and Heliodor, who have been creaming off extortionate revisionary standard variable rates essentially since 2008, leaving even those who kept up with payments in danger of having their home repossessed. 200,000 aspirant homeowners have had their dream taken away from. So can the Prime Minister, instead of playing catch-up with like he is doing with the Post Office scandal, meet with me and campaigners to discuss what more can be done for mortgage prisoners?
Mr. Speaker, I am familiar with the situation for mortgage prisoners, and something I worked on as Chancellor, and I know the Treasury and the current Chancellor have been engaging with campaign groups and others to find ways to resolve it. It's not an easy situation to fix overnight, but there are things that are being looked at as we speak.
Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Scotch Whisky Association published a report looking at the economic impact of the sector, not just in Scotland but across the whole of the UK. Some of the highlights included that in 2022 they generated £7.1 billion in gross value added, £2.1 billion has been invested in capital projects between 2018 and 2022, and 41,000 jobs are supported by the sector in Scotland, including 1 in 9 in my Murray constituency. Does the Prime Minister agree that supporting the Scotch whisky industry in the forthcoming spring budget and beyond is a correct priority for this government?
Well, my honourable friend is a superb ambassador for Murray and for Scotch whisky, and he's right, it's a hugely successful export industry that supports tens of thousands of skilled jobs across Scotland. I won't obviously tread on the Chancellor's toes about future budgets, but I am proud of this government's track record in supporting the industry, having removed US tariffs on Scotch whisky, reduced tariffs and deals with countries like Morocco and Argentina, and also supporting the sector's interest in our FTAs with Australia, New Zealand, and most recently with CPTPP.
Peter Dowd.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been very keen to take credit for falling inflation in previous months. Will he now take responsibility for today's rise?
Mr. Speaker, inflation was over 11% when I got this job. Inflation today is 4%, Mr. Speaker. In common with the US, France, Germany, all countries have seen a mild tick-up in December. All countries have. But the crucial thing is that inflation has been more than halved, delivered ahead of schedule, and that is having an enormous benefit to families up and down the country. Benefit that would be reversed by his party's plan to saddle them with £28 billion of tax rises.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a keen parkrunner in Walsall, but I'm also part of the core team of volunteers that recently brought parkrun to Tamworth. So in the 20th anniversary year of parkrun, will the Prime Minister join me in encouraging other towns that don't yet have a parkrun to get one?
Prime Minister. Well, it's great to hear that my honourable friend is an avid park runner, and I thank him for actually volunteering so that the people of Tamworth can enjoy one too. I completely agree with him. When I had more time, I was a regular at the Northallerton Park Run and the Junior Park Run as well, which I recommend for those with children. It is a fantastic and accessible way to get people moving, and I join him in encouraging everyone to get involved in his local area and beyond.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the last general election, residents in West Hertfordshire were promised a new hospital, but we are still waiting for the green light and having to put up with broken lifts and overly crowded treatment wards. In other parts of the country, there are entire hospital buildings that have had to be closed down, like the one in Stepping Hill in Stockport, because they are structurally unsafe. From broken promises on new hospitals to the backlog of repairs, people are sick and tired of waiting. So can the Prime Minister tell me, by the time of the next general election, how many of the broken hospitals will be fixed, and will my residents be able to point to a single spade in the ground?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're investing record sums to not just deliver 40 new hospitals across the country, but 90 different hospital upgrades. And she'll be familiar with the plans, I hope, at West Hertfordshire Trust to develop a new emergency and specialty care facility at Watford General, including women's and children's services. It will make an enormous difference to residents in the area.
Leave it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent BBC News article raised fears that Blythe could become a ghost town, as we see our shopping centre closed to be replaced by a new higher education facility. Residents are right to be concerned, and I have personally seen decades of Labour neglect and decline in our town. And I really have. But this Conservative government has invested hundreds of millions of pounds to level up my constituency with spades in the ground as I speak here in the House of Commons. Can my right honourable friend assure me that the rebirth of our towns will continue as a key focus of this Conservative government?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I commend him for being such a strong advocate for Blythe. And nearly half of the recent Towns Fund has been distributed to northern regions in England to level up constituencies like his own, and that is the difference. As he said, after years, if not decades, of neglect under the party opposite, it's this government that is levelling up across our country.
Final question, Ian Mans.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker. In June 2022, to some fanfare, the government announced the approval of £41 million for a package of works for the restoration of the Tyne Bridge, which is the route of the A167, the old A1, and it connects Gateshead with Newcastle city centre, and is instantly recognisable around the world as an emblem of Tyneside. However, the funding is still awaiting sign-off within the Department of Transport, and work cannot progress. So given the scale and the complexity of the work that's required, and the significant additional cost implications if funding doesn't come forward, can we actually have the money, please, to get on with the work so that the bridge will be ready for its centenary celebrations in 2028?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll ensure that the relevant minister gets back to him with an update on the project, and I'm pleased not just investing in that project in his area, but also following on from the last question, I know his area has received levelling up funding worth £20 million to help transform the visitor economy in Gateshead. Yet more example of this government investing to level up across the north and across the country.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
And that was PMQs live with me, Gloria De Piero, and Chris Hope. Prime Minister and Keir Starmer traded blows over whether the Rwanda policy is actually the right way to stop the boats.
Yes, indeed. And Maria Colfer, what was your reaction, your takeaway from that PMQs?
Well, it was clear that while Keir Starmer was criticising the Rwanda plan, he doesn't actually have a plan of his own. I think he uses that to detract from the fact that while we've seen a reduction in the number of small boats crossings, the lowest number in 6 years, Labour have been pretty clear that if they come into government, they will scrap all the progress that we're making and we'll be back to square one with a rise and an increase in the number of illegal crossings.
Well, that's interesting because we want to bring your questions into this discussion. It's all about your PMQs, this. Thank you. We've got some great ones in already. Keep sending them, gbviews@gbnews.com. And we love finding out not just your first name, but where you're from, too. And to Maria's point, Stephanie Peacock from Labour, Bruce has been in touch to say, what would Starmer do to stop the boats?
We've been very clear. We've got a plan. We're going to tackle the criminal gangs. That's why people are getting on the boats in the first place. We're going to set up a new police unit. We're going to recruit 1,000 caseworkers to process people and send them back where they're not eligible. We've got a plan, and it's clear that this Rwanda scheme is simply unworkable.
But the problem you've got, Stephanie Peacock, if it works before the election, how can you then get rid of it?
Well, it depends on your definition of what works. You know, the Supreme Court have said only 100 people are eligible to be sent to Rwanda. There's 160,000 people in a black backlog. So I think it comes back to what works, and I simply don't think this does.
And Maria Colfer, your problem is that many of your colleagues on the backbenches don't like the idea. It's not hard enough. I mean, it only needs 30 or so Tory MPs tonight to sink the plan. What's your message to them? And do you understand why they're so worried?
Well, the Rwanda plan is only one small part of our plan to tackle small boats, and actually we're already doing much of what the Labour Party claim is their plan. We're already processing claims. We've cleared the backlog. There's only about 4% left of that backlog. We are tackling the criminal gangs. Thousands have been investigated as part of that, and we are stopping the crossings. You know, we've returned over 26,000 people. So we're already doing that work. So Labour really doesn't have a plan.
But the point is, and this is what Phil from South Shields has written in to say, you've both come up with perfectly good answers, but this is the perception from people watching or listening at home. The only reason the Rwanda scheme isn't working is because we have politicians on both sides of the House that don't have the courage to do what is needed. And this is the problem, isn't it? You say, well, you've got a plan, their plan doesn't work, but people are like, well, is anyone going to be able to sort this out?
I know, and I understand the frustration. The fact of the matter is, though, the government have wasted nearly £400 million of taxpayers' money, and they have sent more cabinet ministers to Rwanda than they have migrants. It isn't a workable plan, and I just don't think a lot of the public think it is.
Are there politicians on both sides of the House? And that was what I found interesting from Phil from South Shields, because Rishi Sunak's point is that this is just the Labour Party getting in the way, they have no plan. But his argument is politicians on both sides of the House of Commons are a problem to dealing with what is necessary to stop the boats.
Well, we are making progress in stopping those boats. So the boats...
Do you think... But what about those people in your own party, as Phil says, and in Steph's party that perhaps squeamish about it too? How much of a problem is that for you when there are some people, and you know, we know it's going to happen tonight. You've got one group saying, oh, no amendments. You've got another group saying, more amendments, please.
Yeah, I mean, the Rwanda issue is one small part of the whole overall package in reducing those small boat crossings, and we are making progress. You know, we had the lowest number in over 6 years crossing, a 50% reduction in the last half of the year. So we want to reassure your viewers that actually the Rwanda scheme is one part of it, but progress is being made already, which would be undone. Keir Starmer's been very clear about this. All of that, the processing, the tackling the gangs. You know, Steph talks about it, but he has been clear he would scrap all of that and be back to square one of just a free-for-all.
Steph, if I may, Ryan says we've wasted 2 years arguing about Rwanda. Why can't we just send them back to France when many boats arriving for the past few days on the south coast? Send them back.
I think if it was that easy, that, you know, I don't think that is a solution, but there's no doubt we do need to work cross-border, and Keir has already been having those conversations, and if we win the election, he will have to, you know, will have to draw up those plans and have to have those conversations. But the fact of the matter is, returns have collapsed 50% under this government compared to the last Labour government, and we haven't been in power for 14 years. It is this Conservative government that has lost control of the borders.
I'm going to come to Maria now with a question from Chris, because the events of last night were difficult for your party. Governing parties do, from time to time, have rebellions. They're uncomfortable. You lost Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith last night. So Chris has been in touch to ask, I guess it's only a question for you, who will Rishi Sunak replace Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith with? Both new MPs from the Red Wall, very different seats to the one that you represent in Lewis. When are we going to see those appointments, and who should it be?
Well, I mean, obviously it's not my place to tell the Prime Minister who to appoint, but I think we have got some real talent. We saw Dean Russell there asking a very important question at PMQs.
About his own health.
Yeah, and he's a very popular guy, so to try and unite colleagues on all sides of the debate, Dean Russell is someone who could, you know, who has that potential. Got Justin Tomlinson, an amazing campaigner. Got Deanna Davidson, you know, who I think, you know, she's not standing again, so she has time to be able to do... you know, being a deputy chairman is quite a busy role, time to get around the country. So we've got some amazing talent on our side.
Do you worry, though, that those two Red Wall MPs resigned last night, and this is almost the party, your party, losing connection with those voters who backed the Tories in 2019 and may vote Labour next time?
So I'm not in a Red Wall seat, but I'm a Brexiteer. I voted for Brexit. I voted to take back control, and I am supporting the Rwanda bill because it does disapply the Human Rights Act. It does have the ability for ministers to overrule court decisions. And on top of the progress we're already making, you know, I talked about the Albanian crossings are down 90%. You know, we are sending people back, 26,000 people. The Rwanda is the last chunk that would actually put people off, act as a deterrent. And I've worked in Rwanda, so you know, I've spent two summers either teaching English or nursing, and I really feel uncomfortable with the way people talk down.
And you were safe there?
Sorry?
It was a safe country?
It was safe there, yeah, and absolutely. And I feel uncomfortable sometimes about the way we talk down Rwanda.
OK. I'm going to widen this debate out a bit. Shelley has been in touch, and we've heard something quite representative of what's gone on today. Obviously, you have different visions of what Britain should look like, different solutions, and you're going to attack your opponents. But Shelley has messaged to say, when are the House of Commons, going to tackle the problems instead of constantly pointing the finger of blame at each other? And this is a really hard question, because it is natural to say, well, they're rubbish and we're better. But is there a way we can do politics in a bit of a better way?
I think that's a really good question. And actually, PMQs is probably the most adversarial. And as Maria said, you know, we saw that really important question from Dean Russell. The first question, indeed, was about dementia. So it is a forum where you can raise some really important constituency issues that affect, you know, ordinary people and indeed MPs themselves. But it's absolutely right. People do want us to talk about the issues. And while there's no doubt people are concerned about Rwanda and immigration, they're also really concerned about the cost of living, and the bills are going up, the fact that mortgages have gone up, and how they're going to pay for things at the end of the month.
Too much punching, Judy?
Yeah, and PMQs isn't really reflective. I mean, I just came from the Women's Health Summit that we held this morning, highlighting the work we're doing, and Sarah Brickcliffe highlighted that in her question. And we highlighted the work we're doing cross-party. You know, Carolyn Harris, the work on the menopause, Olivia Blake, the work on miscarriage. Sarah Brickcliffe is doing huge work in campaigning for better pregnancy care. I think the public don't see that. It doesn't make the news.
But maybe they should, actually.
Maybe
there's a way that
the media won't focus on the Women's Health Summit today. It will all be the Rwanda vote. So people do miss the cross-party work.
There was some positive news in there.
Yeah, there was. I read about it this morning.
Indeed, and also in the PMQs, the PM talked about protections for whistleblowers.
Yes.
Which I think was most interesting. There's work being done by Alex Chalk at the Justice Department to protect people, to blow the whistle on the post office situation, other big rows. So,
what do you think at home? Do you like Prime Minister's Question Time? Do you feel enlightened? Does it give you more confidence in your politicians who represent you? Because there's this great divide there. When people say, do you like politicians, everyone says no. And then when you ask them, do you like your own MP? And they're quite favourable.
What's it like standing up at the dispatch box, looking at your enemy shouting at you and your mates are behind you?
They classically say the enemy's behind you. I'm not sure whether that's true. Of course it can be intimidating, but you're there. You've got a really important platform, and I always think I'm there to give a voice to people who don't always have one. And I find my constituency surgery is really interesting and fascinating. I've done a big campaign on the miners' pensions, for example, on dangerous driving, and they're things that were brought to me from people from Barnsley that really affect their lives.
How do you do it, Maria? Do you find a friend on the Labour benches and look at them all the time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we do, you know, particularly in the health team, you know, I really would like to take the politics out of health completely, because you look at all four nations. Wales run by Labour, SNP run in Scotland, Northern Ireland there's not a functioning assembly at the moment, and we run the health service in England. We all face the same issues, and if we could put politics aside, we might actually make more progress.
Maria, a question which is specifically to you. It is from Dave. Would you ask Rishi Sunak, you are Rishi Sunak for the purposes of this debate, if he thinks Reform UK are a real threat to the Tories? I mean, come on, of course they are. What are you going to do about it? Perhaps not in Lewis.
Well, I don't know. We've got a big chunk. You know, there was a chunk of people who did vote for Brexit in Lewis. Yeah, absolutely. People, when they're frustrated about taking back control of our borders, are thinking about reform. And what I say to people, and the poll showed this from the Telegraph only a couple of days ago, they're not going to win a single seat. And if you want us to continue the progress on things like immigration, the plan is working, maybe not as fast as people want it to, but it's working, then you've got to stick with us, or else it's back to square one with Labour.
And Steph, surely reform is a gift to your party, isn't it?
Well, the Brexit Party did very well in my seat. I think it was a unique election with different challenges to the ones we will face at the next election. The Labour Party are taking nothing for granted, because the only poll that matters is the poll on general election day. I mean, I don't know when the date is. I don't know if Maria is privy to that.
When's the date, Maria? We'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. But the Prime Minister said it's, you know, it's towards the end of the year, so it's not something that's imminent. But yeah, absolutely, reform. You know, that they are. You know, people are attracted to them.
And I think Stephanie Peacock from Labour, the real threat to you, I don't know if you'll acknowledge it, is that people are like, well, don't really like him, don't really like them. It's people who think, I'm not going to bother voting for either of them.
Well, we've got to inspire, we've got to put an offer together. But, you know, I ran the Tamworth by-election, for example, and the only way we won that is with switchers. We simply wouldn't have won it unless people switched from Conservative to Labour, and that is because we are building confidence and we do have an offer for people, and we've got to keep making that case because we're taking nothing for granted.
And that's the real fight. But Maria Caulfield, back to today. Tonight, the party, your government could lose primary legislation. That could trigger a Labour vote of no confidence in the government as soon as, well, tomorrow or being tabled maybe next week. Will you win tonight?
Well, we've got some amendments as well. So the third reading comes towards the end of the day. So there'll be some further amendments we'll be voting on.
They won't get through, though. It's all about the third reading.
No, it's all about the third reading. We're confident that those who've voted against the legislation last night, have made some valid points. It will go to the House of Lords, then it will come back. There's a chance to look at amendments. And the Prime Minister is in listening mode. But we're confident for third reading that we will get that through.
So you could amend... Sorry, forgive me. You could amend the bill after the House of Lords.
Well, that's standard practice for any legislation. There's often amendments following the House of Lords, and the House of Lords will obviously be a challenge in itself.
I'm going to ask you both this. Would you bet your mortgage on Rishi Sunak leading you into the next election?
Yes.
Stephanie Peacock, because you get to look at it from the other side, as it were.
I mean, surely they can't put is it a third elected Prime Minister? I mean, I've lost track. I mean, I think we need a general election, really, and we need it
And there was a question on that. My question to the Prime Minister would be, will you now resign and call a general election? That's what Warren said, but you think we've got to wait till November?
Look, we've got really important work. You've seen the inflation figures today. We have halved inflation, but it's not a done deal. That's important to people's purses at home. Immigration, we're making progress, and we want to get that final nail in the Rwanda plan. So we've got work to be done before an election happens.
You have both been fantastic guests. Stephanie Peacock from Labour and Health Minister Maria Caulfield, thank you very much for coming in. We hope you'll be back again. Another all-woman panel. We might invite another bloke in next week, just for you, Chris.
And you'll be watching and listening to PMQs Live with Gloria Piero and me, Christopher Hope. We're back next week. Please do tune in and think about your best questions now. Send them in next week. Don't go anywhere. Next up, it's Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry for many of us today, sunniest in the south, a lot of cloud elsewhere, and it will continue to feel cold, especially in the south where we've got this easterly wind and cold air imported from the continent. Further north, lighter winds with high pressure nearby, but a lot of cloud coming into northern and eastern Scotland, southern Scotland as well, northern and eastern England. And here there will be some showers, rain at lower levels, some snow over the hills, but mostly these showers are light, 1 or 2 showers for Wales as well. But otherwise, western Scotland, southern and southeast England seeing the best of any sunshine, and wherever you are, it will feel cold, 5, 6 Celsius at best. Some places staying at 1 to 3 Celsius with that biting in wind from the east affecting southern areas. And we'll continue to see that overnight. Clear skies in the south leading to a widespread frost once again, temperatures dipping to -1 or -2 Celsius fairly widely. Western Scotland also seeing a touch of frost because of clear skies here, but elsewhere where we've got the cloud, well, it's going to stay frost-free across parts of East Wales into northern and eastern England, eastern Scotland as well. Fewer showers around on Thursday. In fact, after 1 or 2 showers first thing, it mostly becomes dry by the afternoon. Increasing amounts of sunshine across much of Scotland, less sunshine further south and southeast, with cloud increasing through the day.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 17th of January.
Final showdown. Rishi Sunak faces the toughest challenge to his leadership yet, with the final Commons votes on his totemic Rwanda bill. He lashed out at Sir Keir Starmer over his former job as a human rights lawyer, while the Labour leader compared Tory MPs to hundreds of bald men scrapping over a single broken comb.
But as the crunch Rwanda votes approach this afternoon, GB News can exclusively reveal that a further seven boats crossed the channel this morning, bringing around 300 further illegal migrants to the UK. The pressure truly is mounting.
And the tragic story of a toddler found starved to death next to his dead father in Lincolnshire. Serious questions are now being asked of social